Rupert, Federico, an absolute pleasure to be with you both. It really is. I want to start by saying that we're really here to bridge the spiritual and the scientific. And Rupert, I don't think there's anything more interesting or indeed more important than that.
I would agree, Simon. I'm very happy to be here. Very happy to meet Federico, and yes, it's must be one of the most important things in our era to bridge the perennial philosophy of the ancient teaching with contemporary physics, and who better than you, Federico, to help us do this?
And Federico, for you, I sense a real urgency in this mission, as it were, to bridge these two areas.
Yes, I do, because the incursion of artificial intelligence is confusing very much the issue as to who we are. Of course, the scientism is already telling us that we are machines. So, as machines, when the machine breaks, there is nothing there. The body, of course, would be the machine, but we are more than machines. And and when AI behaves in a way through our training, behaves in a way that is difficult to distinguish if what comes out of the computer is a human or an AI system, then we have a real problem, because also it confuses the boundaries between what is human and what is not. And so of course, I was working with artificial intelligence back in the second half of the 80s. So almost 40 years ago. And I recognize that AI will come, and it will come through neural networks, which was what I was studying at that time. And now I see that we have to go way, way beyond our understanding, and only science and spirituality. And I would even dare to say that we are made of three different entities, if you want, or parts: body, mind, and spirit. And the body is really the physical. The mind is like quantum physics. Is basically what is possible, what goes, the thoughts and intuitions and so on. And the spirit is about the meaning of who we are.
Can I add something to that, Simon? Just briefly, this going back to your opening phrase about bridging science and spirituality, which we tend to think of two opposing, opposite ends of a spectrum, and often opposing ends. If consciousness is the ultimate reality, as I think Federico and I would both suggest it is, then the ultimate science must be the science of consciousness, the knowledge of consciousness. So, and that's what the essence of so-called spirituality is about, the nature of consciousness. So actually, the divide between science and spirituality is a completely artificial one. The true science, the ultimate science, is the science of consciousness. And that is the subject matter of the spiritual tradition. So actually, they're not really divided. They've only become divided because of our erroneous view of reality. So we're not really uniting them. We're just revealing the underlying reality that is already the nature of true science, the ultimate science, and true spirituality.
And I want to see where your views of consciousness and reality converge and diverge. And you touched on it earlier, Federico. You were involved in AI right at the outset. You also invented the microprocessor. And I saw during my research a newspaper clipping of you at a time when you were setting out to create a conscious computer. Can you just describe what you were like then?
I was a materialist. I mean, I had abandoned, whatever education and religious education that I had, but that was not spiritual, was religious education that I had. And I had accepted that we are the body. So I had essentially accepted the worldview that today is prevalent. And it was only because I was studying neuroscience and I was studying computers, of course, neural networks and so on, that I asked myself a question. I said, wait a second. I mean, these books on neuroscience, they talk about, electrical signals in the brain and biochemical signals in the brain when they, for example, describe how we recognize, chocolate in our mouth. But I say, I recognize the chocolate in my mouth because I feel the taste of the chocolate. It's not, I don't feel electrical signals. So there is a misconception here in neuroscience. They don't understand that there has to be something to go from electrical signals in the brain to the taste of chocolate, which is what I know the chocolate from that. But of course, I could also know the chocolate from my electrical signals in the brain, but I will only know the symbol chocolate, but not the taste. So for me, at that time, it was crucial to understand how consciousness works. And because I was a materialist, I decided to try out to create a robot, because you had to have sensory and activators, and it could have to perceive the world and act in the world. Because consciousness is, the body does that, so it's not just a computer. The brain would be the aspect of a conscious computer. So for me, that was the test if consciousness was really, physical or not. But I couldn't do it. I mean, there was nothing in physics that could tell you how you could transform electrical signals into qualia, what became to be known as qualia about 80 years later. And so for me, then there was a mystery, and that mystery was solved through an extraordinary experience of consciousness that I had, at that time, in 1990, that revealed that I could not be my body because my consciousness was outside my body. So how can I be my body? When the consciousness was perceived as to be, in my head, when I'm everywhere. I'm in my body, but also outside my body. How is that possible? So that changed my mind, and it took 20 years of work to actually realize that consciousness had to be foundational. Consciousness and free will had to be part and parcel of each other, because consciousness without free will makes no sense. How can you free will only makes sense if you know what you want, and then you can direct your knowing of yourself. So if you don't have free will, you only have conscience. That doesn't make any sense. So for me, free will and conscience had to be part of who we are, even if we have a very limited free will, but still, we have some. And so that was the beginning of my journey. And then after 20 years of work, personal work, and trying to understand how all things work, and I had many extraordinary experiences at that time as well. Then I decided that I need to create an understanding of quantum physics, classical physics, and consciousness in a new way, and that's really has been the work of my last 18 years. So.
Well, Federico, that was a comprehensive answer, but I just want you to to expand a little bit on your experience in 1990, because it sounds like the materialist paradigm had already started to crumble. And I know as well that I think the year before, or even 1990, you'd been awarded the top prize in America for your discoveries. So you were incredibly successful in the classical sense, but there was a suffering inside as well. And you had even started praying for some answers into who am I? And then from that, can you just expand a little bit on that experience in Lake Tahoe in 1990? Because it's very evocative.
Yeah, well, rapidly, at that time I was also unhappy with myself, which was strange. I mean, how can I be unhappy? I have achieved everything that I wanted to do, and And I was one of the few lucky ones that could say that, and I was miserable inside. So what's wrong with this picture? That was a problem of consciousness, right? so so that in that climate where I wanted to understand consciousness as a personal problem and also as a as physics or as the nature of reality, I had this conscious experience where one night I was on vacation and Lake Tahoe. I woke up in the middle of the night, thirsty, got a glass of water, went back to bed, and as I was trying to go back to sleep, this energy, physical energy, coming out of my chest, just like a beam. But it was unbelievable energy that felt like love, 10,000, 100 times stronger than any love that I felt, and not directed to anybody. It was unconditional. Now I know the word, but at that time it was just love, and I was stunned. How can I be the source of love? Me, the source of love, incredible. But it was also mixed inside. It was joy and peace. And peace I've never felt in my life because I was never where I was. I was always, planning the future, and I was never in where in the place and time where I actually was. And why was it peace? Because that energy was me. My consciousness was also in this energy that was coming out of me. So I was that. And then this energy, expanded, kind of, it felt like it blew up and is everywhere. And now it's in this white scintillating light. My body is hot and vibrating. My mind is saying, wow, this is the stuff of which everything is made. So, the thought was, this is it. This is this stuff that feels like love. And it has, is conscious and whatever is not only me, but it's also the stuff of which everything is made. So I was both the observer and the observed. And and with that, my entire understanding of who I was was basically upended, and it was upside down. I mean, it was it was, but the feeling of truth that came from that experience was so powerful and so incredible. And for the first time, I could see that I could know and know that I know, because that experience was a direct experience of consciousness. Now, I didn't have those words in those days, but basically, we have each one of us has that capacity to know directly who we are. Now, it doesn't come with an equation. It doesn't come with it's not even verbal. It goes beyond verbal. It goes beyond measure, beyond numbers. So that changed my perspective of life. And so it was the beginning of this 20-year journey that I mentioned earlier to find out more about it, which ended with knowing that I wanted to join the aspects of reality that were disjointed, join him in the understanding. Clearly, they cannot be disjointed, but I wanted to figure him out, being able to explain it to myself and then to others.
Rupert, this direct knowing that Federico's nodded to, is this the key aspect of what you said earlier, the science of consciousness? And to what degree is it not appreciated by science more broadly, in your view?
Yes, this self-knowledge is really it's the essence of the spiritual traditions. And what does self-knowledge mean? It means our knowledge of ourselves, not our knowledge of our thoughts, feelings, sensations, perception. That's not self-knowledge. That's knowledge of ideas, knowledge of the body, but our knowledge of ourself. Well, what is it that has knowledge of ourself? Only that which knows. Only that which is aware. So self-knowledge means awareness of itself. And this is not the awareness's experience of itself is not an extraordinary, rarefied experience that one in a million people have. Actually, everybody, well, I was going to say everybody is having that experience all the time. People don't have that experience. Only awareness is aware. Only consciousness is conscious. Only consciousness has the experience of being itself. But within the limitations of language, everybody is having the experience of being aware all the time. And not just those of us that are interested in these matters, but anyone. You just go outside and ask anyone on the street, are you having the experience of being aware? Is it your experience that you are aware? Everyone would pause and go, yes, of course. Of course, it's my experience that I am aware. Well, what is it that has the experience of being aware? Well, whatever it is that has the experience of being aware must itself be aware. So right there, in the pause between the question, are you aware? And your response, yes. Awareness ceases directing itself, its attention towards the content of experience. It lets go of thoughts, feelings, because the question wasn't, are you having thoughts? If I ask you, are you having thoughts, you direct your attention towards your thoughts. If I ask you, are you hearing sounds, you direct your attention towards the sounds. But if I ask you, are you aware? Your attention goes back to awareness. Awareness becomes aware of itself. In fact, awareness is always aware of itself, but its awareness of itself is so mixed up with thoughts and feelings and sensations and perceptions that although everybody is having the experience of being aware all the time, that their awareness of their self is mixed with thoughts and feelings. And so we think we are this temporary, finite, limited awareness that lives in the body and is derived from the body and shares the limits and destiny of the body. But really, if we just go deeply into that experience of being aware, if awareness gives its entire attention to itself, which is, of course, the essence of meditation or prayer or inquiry, then awareness, it finds no limits in itself. It is infinite. It is free. It is it's imperturbable, and hence its nature is peace. It knows nothing other than itself or outside of itself. Hence, its nature is said to be love. And this is a direct experience of one's essential nature that is available to everybody. It's been shrouded in complexity and obscurity in the past by, I think, by many spiritual and religious traditions who were speaking appropriately for their time and location. But now we can speak about these matters without the veiling, the obscurity, the packaging that the religious and spiritual traditions used to speak of them in. We can speak of them directly, and this recognition of who we essentially are it's available to everybody directly.
You describe it as an unremarkable experience, and clearly that is true. It is always present. However, Federico's experience did sound remarkable, and he had that experience of being the observer, the observed, and still having this point of view as well.
Yeah.
And so that does seem to be a more heightened version of this experience. So how does that fit into what you've just said about the ordinary aspect of self-knowing?
Well,
Let me give you sorry.
in the ordinary aspect of my experience, I believe to be the body. I believe that consciousness is a property of the body. And I never felt myself outside the body. So that's not a property of an ordinary conscious experience. And so the fact of being both inside my body and outside my body, all of a sudden, I have to deal with it also from a physicalist point of view. Never mind with a broader point of view. So, and to me, that's something that changes the perception in a fundamental way. I think that if without that experience, I would have continued to believe that I was my body. But now the theory is that I'm a field that doesn't even exist in space and time. I am a field. Consciousness, in my case, in the way I look at it, is a property of the field because I am a field. Ontology is in the field that is conscious, has free will, and has the capacity to know itself and to want to know itself. And so for me, then, the body is simply like an instrument that the field communicates with to have another experience in a reality that we don't know what it is, but it is perceived through the instrument. So the instrument perceives this physical reality, transforms that information into a different type of information, is quantum and classical information inside the cells of the body. The consciousness, which is a field that contains this body, this instrument is part of this field. Uh, so is but the field is vaster than space and time and matter and energy, and it has an experience. The field has an experience of what the body perceives, but the experience is not in the body. So again, if I did not have the experience of the consciousness was outside the body, I could not imagine possibly that I could experience something outside of the body. You see what I mean? Or
Yeah.
later on, I had out of body experiences, in which case the my experience was literally outside of the body. Also, it was outside, and I could move independent from the body. That's even further evidence, experiential evidence that I'm not the body. So the body is really the confusion between consciousness as a property of the body or consciousness as a property of something vaster than the body. That's what the rub is. You see.
Rupert, before we move on, do you want to just speak about that extraordinary experience to the ordinary?
Yes, I'd like to give you an analogy to help reconcile what was for you, Federico, obviously a hugely profound and genuine and extraordinary experience, and my claim that the knowing of our own being, that is, consciousness' knowledge of itself, is our natural condition and is actually the simplest, most intimate, most ordinary experience, if we can call it an experience, there is. So let me give you an analogy to try and reconcile these two seemingly opposite possibilities. Imagine you've been on a long trip. You fly back into London. In your case, you get the bus stop to you get the bus to your local to bus stop clearest to home. You've got a 60-pound rucksack on your back, and you walk home from the bus stop. It's half a mile. Your wife can't come and get you. She's busy with the kids. You walk home. You've got 60 pounds on your back. You get home. You're exhausted. You're aching. You're tired. You come into your home. You take the rucksack off and you put it down. The moment you put it down, you feel elated. You feel marvelous. You feel liberated from the tyranny of this weight that you've been carrying. You feel as light. You feel you're flying. You say hello to your wife, the kids. You're good. 10 minutes later, you are not feeling elated. You don't feel you're flying. You don't feel extraordinary. You don't feel much. You just feel normal. But you're in exactly the same condition that you were in 10 seconds after you took your rucksack off. So there were these two experiences that when you took your rucksack off was a marvelous, extraordinary, heightened, peak experience, which later became your natural condition. And you didn't consider it ordinary precisely because it's your true nature. Your true nature it's everything apart from your true nature that is extraordinary. Our true nature is the most obvious, intimate, so-called ordinary thing there is. But by contrast with the dualistic way we usually perceive subject, object, me, other, then of course it is extraordinary.
Does that ring true, Federico?
Not completely, Rupert, because um, because there is a quality when your conscience is outside of the body. There is a quality that doesn't exist in elation or any of the ordinary. Elation is ordinary, is a extraordinary ordinary experience, but it's still ordinary in the sense that everybody can have that. Not everybody can have consciousness out of the body, which is everywhere in space and time. And so to me, that was a wake up call. I had many elation experiences when the microprocessor worked. Wow, I was unbelievably happy for a day. But that was still ordinary. I had the same kind of feeling when my model planes flew well. Yeah, so when I was a kid. So for me, there is something more in an experience of you being a field. When I'm out of the body, I'm everywhere, just like a field is. The definition of a field is something that has no boundaries, something that is not bounded by the body. The body bounds also the elation experience for me. So maybe for you it's different, but for me that's not the case. So
I would suggest that consciousness is always experiencing itself as it is. In other words, never really experiences itself being inside the body or indeed inside the world or the time and space in which the world seems to exist. It's only when consciousness rises in the form of sense perception that it seems to localize itself behind that perceiving barrier. And now, when it looks out at itself through the lens of sense perception, it perceives itself as the world. So, for instance, to give you an analogy, think of what happens when you have a dream. You have a dream at night. You fall asleep. You imagine the dreamed world within your own mind. You're dreaming you're on a Caribbean beach, and you simultaneously localize yourself as a person on the deck chair on the Caribbean beach. And as that person, you feel that the knowing with which you are knowing your experience is located in your head. And it seems to be obvious. You close your eyes, the Caribbean beach vanishes. You open them again, it reappears, and you think, well, it's obvious. Whatever it is that's perceiving the beach must be located behind my eyes. I am having the experience of consciousness in the body. But then you wake up and you realize you never had the experience of consciousness being in the body of the dreamed character. Your own mind took the form of the dreamed character and fooled itself into believing that it was located in the dreamed character's body. But that was an illusion caused by dreaming. Well, I would suggest that no one ever actually has the experience of being located in the body. We perceive, even this is not quite true, but suffice for the moment to say we perceive through the body. Just like when we dream we're on a Caribbean beach, we dream through the body of the person we seem to be on the Caribbean beach. But our mind, the dreamer's mind, is not located in the dreamed character's mind, even while they're having the dream. So I would suggest consciousness is actually never has the experience of being in the body. It's the mind that erroneously believes the evidence of sense perceptions and believes and therefore superimposes on itself the feeling that we are inside the body. But if you close your eyes and go to the experience of consciousness, you'll find no limit there, no location there, no age there, no gender there, no form there, no.
Well, I must have been an exception then, because because what you're speaking is of a theory of consciousness, which is your theory of consciousness. And by the way, now I agree with you.
But I'm speaking from experience. I'm articulated in conceptual terms, but I'm speaking of my experience of consciousness.
Yeah, but and I was speaking of my own experience of consciousness.
Yes,
So
yes.
we experience consciousness differently, perhaps. Now I know that my consciousness is not in the body. So what you're saying is correct with what I know now, but it
Yes.
was not correct. If you had told me what you just said uh, 35 years ago, 36 years ago, before I had this experience, I would have said, "Well, what are you talking about?"
Yes, yes.
So,
But I
so,
think we're saying
so
the same.
so then, but at that time I had discriminated what is consciousness and what is electrical signals, which most people don't even have made that discrimination.
Yes.
Yeah.
So for me, consciousness was something unknown at that point. It was not a phenomenon of the brain. It could not be because I could not. I understood that qualia is not the same as electrical signals. That was the hard problem of consciousness that was 1990 that David Chalmers brought to the scientific community very eloquently, understanding that consciousness could not be the same as electrical signals, and so I discovered on my own because of my situation at that time and my interests. But the point is that I, you know, I could not, I would not have understood anything of what you said to me, you know, a
Yes.
moment
No,
ago
no,
at that time.
I understand that. And I think we're describing the experience of consciousness. We both come to that to that recognition in very different ways. And of course we have different backgrounds, so we use different languages. But I think we're both describing the what is now an obvious fact to
Yeah.
both of us, that consciousness is not located in the body, is not even located in the time and space in which the world seems to be
Yeah,
located. It's so obvious. We've come to that experience in very different that understanding in very different ways. But I
yeah,
from what you say, and I've listened to a few interviews with you by way of preparation from this, and I was very interested. I wanted to find out what do we agree about? We seem to agree about a great deal. And is there any real difference between us, or is it just a semantic difference? And from what you said so far, I feel we both are describing the same experience of a consciousness that is not located anywhere in time and space.
Yeah,
yeah.
that's my impression from just listening to you, and I don't want to get too bogged down just at this point. I do think keen to just keep rolling on a little
Okay.
bit.
Okay.
Before we get to your models or the models, an upgraded model of reality, I do think it's important to just nod to the fact that the mainstream model of reality has been stuck in the same place for over 100 years. So the 19th century model of reality has not been upgraded despite scientific discoveries. It seems to me the idea that the physical world is all that exists, the observer has no effect on reality, space-time is independent and absolute, and those kind of things. And as you nodded to, Federico, the hard problem of consciousness, this
Yeah.
problem of how do conscious experiences arise from matter. And I've heard you say, Federico, that people who have tried to, in the scientific community, stray away from this dogma have been decried and even ridiculed as childish. And so there seems to be a real resistance to letting this go, in spite of the obvious evidence to counter it.
Yeah. I mean, the most theories, almost all scientific theories start from the idea that consciousness is a property of the brain. So you have to have a brain to even be conscious. So, that is the starting point. And of course, for me, consciousness is something that exists way before there are brains. It exists from the very beginning, if you want to, if we can say about a beginning of the universe. So is has always existed. Conscience and free will have always existed. So it's a big difference. So the quantum fields of physics must be conscious. In quantum physics, for most physicists, is simply a mathematical theories to predict what you can measure in space and time, because reality is only what you can measure in space and time. This is the crazy point of view that most scientists today have, and that's part of scientism, what I call scientism, despite the fact that we can actually have quantum computation that the physicists don't know where it can happen, because it can certainly not happen in space and time. It must happen in a deeper reality. And so now they go into the many world interpretation of Everett to explain that in each world there is one of the parallel computation. In each universe there is, a parallel, one of the parallel computation that a quantum computer can make. I mean, how crazy can you be to actually create this, to explain something that should be explained in a completely different way by creating an infinity of universes every instant. I mean, this is mind-boggling to me. So,
And
I
it's
mean,
and
to
it's
me,
all
there is a
because
deeper
they
reality. There is a deeper reality out of which this space-time matter-energy reality that we think is reality is only one of the many possible manifestations. It's illusory reality that we believe to be reality. But
Can I just comment about what you said about the hard problem of consciousness, Simon? I don't know why we're still talking about the hard problem of consciousness. It's a naive, simplistic, out of date idea. And it comes from believing the erroneous evidence of sense perception. We used to believe the Earth is flat. Why? Because when we look at the horizon, it looks flat. We used to think the sun travels around the Earth. Why? Because when we look at the sunrise in the morning, it seems to rise, and we look at it in the evening, it seems to set. So we think the sun must go around the Earth. It was it seemed obvious at the time, but then when we discovered it wasn't the case, we thought, oh, of course, we just misread the evidence. It wasn't real evidence. And the same sense perceptions that used to tell us the Earth was flat and we live in a geocentric universe now tells us that consciousness seems to be located in the body, is derived from it, and shares its limitations and destiny. It's like believing the Earth is flat and the sun, we live in a geocentric universe. What's really interesting and what we should be talking about is the hard problem of matter. How what we call matter is derived from consciousness. Why? Because one, it is our experience that consciousness is primary. So if we want to build a model of the universe, why not start with our experience, something we can test in our experience? Two, it stands it stands up to rational scrutiny. So we should be talking about the hard problem of matter. That's really interesting.
I
How
do Rupert, I do agree with you, and I confidently so all three agree. Three of us are on the same page
yeah,
there.
we're on the
But
same page.
the reason we're still talking about the hard problem of consciousness, though, is because the vast majority, 95% at least, of the world still is of the belief that consciousness is an emergent property of matter,
Of
whether
the
they
brain,
realize
of the
they have that
matter.
belief or of the brain,
Yeah.
whether they believe they have that belief, whether they realize they have that belief or not. And then as a result of that, we see the consequences of that in the way that the world is being lived.
Exactly. We one look at the world. I mean, the despair, the extent of the despair that people, the conflicts, that the dreadful conflicts that it take. One look at the world. If we just pause and if an alien were to visit our world and look at the way we treat each other, the way we live, they would think we were sick or deranged. I mean, one look at the state of the world now. Doesn't it make us question? Could we have something? Might we have got something wrong? What's the fundamental cause of this despair and conflict it's not just tweaking a few borders between nations and peace treaty. That's not going to do any good at all. It'll just postpone the issue for another 5 or 10 years. The only thing that's going to make any difference is to realize that our paradigm is our world culture is based on a faulty paradigm, a simplistic, naive, faulty paradigm.
But Federico,
To
why,
me,
in your view, are people so reluctant to let go of this faulty paradigm? And I've heard you talk about power.
because the delusion of being the body is so so strong. I mean, we believe to be the body. I mean, that's also part of our human experience to to believe that in order to have be serious about who you are, of course, and therefore to experience what will hopefully wake you up from the delusion that you are the body. So to me, the problem is not that Rupert and I'm completely in agreement with the essence of who we are that Rupert also talks about. But the problem is that most people don't believe that, and not only that, but they haven't even had the foggiest idea that it might be different than what they think, because the what I call scientism, the materialistic reductionistic view of reality based on essentially a dogmatic reality based on classical physics, not quantum physics. Quantum physics is not doesn't even describe the physical world. Quantum physics describes the mental universe, not the mental, our mental universe, the mental universe. It tells us what we can know about the world, not what we will measure in the world, because it only gives you probability of what you might measure. And so to go from probability to actuality, you need free will, the free will of the field that you are observing, not the consciousness of the observer, the consciousness of the free will of the field that you are observing. So if you observe the field of electrons, it is the field of electrons that decides where it will show up the electron in the double slit experiment, for example, not the observer. So that's another misconception that exists in physics, and the few physicists that have thought that perhaps consciousness could do something about in reality. But most, that interpretation is long gone. I mean, most scientists don't believe in that early interpretation that consciousness was the collapse of the wave function. The collapse of the wave function in this new theory that I have with Professor Dariano, is that it is a free will decision of the field that is actually interacting eventually with the measurement system. So it is the field that decides what to show up, not the decoherence. Not there's all kinds of other theories and that don't bear any coherence with what's going on. And also consciousness without free will would have no power. Would be just like being aware of something. There is nothing you can do about it. So the point I think that is crucial in my view compared to Rupert, I think, is the idea that there are many seities, which are quantum fields that are consciousness with free will, that interact with each other to know themselves, so that through that process one knows itself. That is the crucial aspect. I think that my understanding about you, Rupert, is that you think more that there is one field, one conscious field, and everything happens in that conscious field. That is the consciousness
Yes.
of one. But there are the consciousness of one is also, also one knows itself as many. So the way one knows is through a fractal-like structure
Yes.
that are.
Rupert, sorry, before you answer, and I'm very keen to get that, I just think it's important just to clarify. You mentioned the word satiety there, Federico,
Yes.
because we've established, right, this belief that we are the body, this egoic belief that we are the body comes with problems, and we are not the body. We experience, as it were, let me see if I get this right, Federico, through the body, but the quality of the experience of that is not taking place in the body, it is taking place in a quantum field, which you called a satiety. So could you just quickly, before Rupert answers, as you asked him to, just quickly just tie that up a little bit into, so we can understand that clearly?
Yeah. The name satiety, I chose that name simply because in quantum physics, the quantum fields are neither conscious nor have free will. So attributing consciousness and free will to those fields, those are no longer the fields of quantum physics. And of course, consciousness and free will are there from the very beginning of those fields, which is the beginning of the universe. So then I used a different name to distinguish between the quantum fields without consciousness and free will and the quantum fields with consciousness and free will. So that's it. Just a name to avoid the confusion that otherwise people might have. And those fields are foundational. For example, in this theory, the field of electrons is conscious. And the electrons, as you know, in quantum physics, the electrons are not objects. They're not objects separate from the field. They are states of the field. So just like the waves of the sea are not separable from the sea. So the properties of the waves are really ultimately the property of the field. So in that sense, yes, the waves are properties, represent properties of the field. But if you look at the wave, as if it were separated from the sea, you would not, it would not make, you would have to consider that as an object when it is not an object. And that's the same thing that happened in quantum physics for many decades. With quantum field theory, it was established that there is no object. The particles, the atoms and molecules, they are not objects. They are quantum structures that are manifestation of the field, of the relative field. So that changes completely also the understanding of physics. But that's not the understanding of scientism. Scientism is still believing in particles and atoms as objects in space and time, which they are not. So for me, for example, my body is like the electron is to the quantum field of electrons what my body is to my sati. I'm not, what I believe to be when I'm incarnated is not what I believe to be when I'm not incarnated. When I'm incarnated, there is a very small portion of my consciousness, the consciousness of this sati, which is the field that I am. This consciousness, a small portion of it, is the ego, that is the part of me that believes to be the body, is identified with the body. But when I die, this ego will simply no longer paying attention to the signals produced by the body as the reality. It will actually look around and say, "Oh, wow, my goodness, I'm not what I thought." Like when you wake up from a dream, but then it remembers that it was many other selves. There were the various egos of various lives that sati had, and so it will reintegrate with the vaster field, a vaster self. But that is not one. That is simply the sati that I am. The sati that I am is much vaster than the ego that I believe to be, is the consciousness that I believe to be when I'm incarnated. And of course, the experiences where my consciousness was everywhere, there were little peaks that my ego had when the vaster self opened up the window, so to speak, allow me to see more clearly what to the ego to see more clearly what I am.
Okay, Rupert, we will. Let me just clarify the question, as it were. Okay, as I understand it, so there's one holistic whole reality, and then in your view, Federico, from that becomes these seities that we are. These conscious fields,
Yeah.
But they each have free will. Now that
Yes.
does diverge from your take on things, doesn't it, Rupert?
I understand that reality is one, and being one, it is indivisible, because anything that arises in the one must be made out of the one, because all there is in the one is itself. So there's nothing in the one out of which any real division could be made. So the one is indivisible, in the same way anything that arises on a screen doesn't really divide the screen because it's made of the screen. So the one is indivisible. It is without limits, because any limit would have to be something other than the one that would constrain it. But there isn't anything other than the one. So the one, and its nature is pure consciousness. Could be also referred to as love. And so there is just this one reality made of pure consciousness. And the one reality, by definition, knows itself, not in subject-object relationship, because the one can't separate itself from itself and look back on itself and know it as an object. So when I say the one knows itself, I don't mean that the one knows itself like we perceive a tree or we know a thought in subject-object relationship. The sun knows itself, I would suggest, in the same way that the sun illuminates itself. The sun doesn't illuminate, it illuminates the earth by standing apart from it and shining its light towards the earth and illuminating it, but it illuminates itself. The sun can't separate itself from itself and shine back on itself and illuminate itself in subject-object relationship. It just illuminates itself by being itself. It is self-luminous. And I would suggest that in exactly the, because the sun is made of light, therefore it cannot not illuminate itself. Consciousness is made of pure knowing, so it cannot not know itself. Its nature is, it is self-knowing by nature. Knowing itself is what it is, not what it does. Now, the one also, it's not a static. It vibrates within itself, and it can localize itself within itself as a seemingly separate subject of experience. In the same way that I'm mixing my metaphors now. I'm sorry. Take vast physical space, just the ordinary classical idea of space, a vast, but infinite, boundless physical space with no divisions in it. Now imagine a building is built, a room is built in physical space. Now, the one physical space now seems to be bounded by the building. So there now seems to be a finite space. Now, if you really investigate the nature of that finite space that seems to be bounded by the building, and you compare it with the space outside the building, they're identical. We don't suddenly have two spaces now. There's just one space. Part of it seems to be bounded by the four walls of the building. I would suggest a very similar thing happens, that there is just the one. The one rises in the form of perception, and in doing so, it seems to localize itself inside the body as a finite consciousness, a finite mind, a separate self, an ego.
Okay,
Let me just finish what I was saying. Now, the consciousness that is now seems to be bounded by the, so to speak, the four walls of the body, seems to be a limited consciousness. The consciousness that seems to be in the body now seems not to know itself as it truly is. It believes that it's a temporary, finite consciousness. And therefore, all the great traditions, from the ancient Greeks to the ancient, they all said the first and most important thing for all finite minds to do is know thyself. When the Greeks wrote, know thyself above the temple of Apollo in Delphi, they were not speaking to consciousness. They were not speaking to awareness. That would be like telling the sun, you have to illuminate yourself. No, the sun's already illuminating itself. They were speaking to the finite mind. They were speaking to the people. They were speaking to those that thought they were temporary, finite, separate selves. Those people have to know themselves. They have to look at the consciousness inside their self. It's like looking at the space in your room and sampling it. Realize, oh no, the space in my room is already the vast space of the universe. There is always only one physical space in the universe. It's not divided into separate rooms and buildings. And I would suggest the same. There's always only one infinite reality made of consciousness or love. It never really separates itself into a finite mind. But when it seems to, then the first prerequisite of that finite mind is to investigate itself and discover its true nature.
May I say something? Because
You
I
may.
think it is a crucial distinction here. And so I start with a postulate, which I call the postulate of being. It says that one, the totality of what exists, is dynamic, is holistic, and want to know itself. So dynamic means continuously changes, it's never the same, instant after instant. Holistic means it's not made of separable parts. Is everything is interconnected within one. So far, I'm saying the same thing that you said. Wants to know itself. So how does it know itself? To want to know itself, the want is the will, which becomes free will in the seities. But as far as one is concerned, its will is what it is. There is only one will, so you cannot even speak of free will for one. And to know itself, it must be conscious. So it has to have the capacity to self-reflect somehow. It's a form of self-reflection of its own nature. The energy of which of one has the capacity to know itself, to self-reflect. Okay, and the self-reflection produces two things: produces qualia, which is the sensations and feelings through which one or the parts, all of one knows itself, the seities, and also produces the meaning of its knowing. The meaning of its knowing is what one is after. It's not after the sensations and feelings, it's after the meaning. And information, what we call information, even in science or even in our life, is really translating the meaning into symbols so that we can communicate. But going back to this idea, then when one knows itself, it brings into existence from a potentiality of itself, which it cannot know. It's the part of itself that it doesn't know. That potentiality is would be like the unconscious of one, if you want to use a terminology which we kind of understand. But from that unconscious, from that potentiality, it brings into existence what it knows. So what it knows now cannot be separate from itself, because it must be a part whole of itself. And now I stop here because there is a metaphor which is really incredible. Our body is built the same way. Every cell of my body are parts whole of the entire organism, which is my body. Because each cell, 30 to 50 trillion cells that I have in my body, we all have in our bodies, have the genome of the egg that produced the entire organism. So each cell has the potential knowledge of the whole. That's why there is epigenetics, because a cell later on in life can express aspects of itself that were not at its birth. Computers, for example, are not built that way at all. The parts of a computer, there are probably 1 trillion, 2 trillion, say, okay, those parts are switches on off. They don't know anything of the whole. They have no knowledge, potential knowledge of the whole. So even the body, which is a quantum classical system, is built complete, and it is still a machine, but a machine of a sophistication that we don't even know today. We don't understand. That machine is not conscious, does not have free will. It depends on a field to be conscious and have free will, and a field that doesn't even exist in space and time. So, the distinction here is so crucial, to be made, that when one then knows itself with a certain point of view, because one glances at itself, it glances at itself in just like we do, in a certain direction. It knows itself in that direction. That direction is the identity of the field that it brings into existence when it knows itself in that direction. And it can know itself in potentially infinite number of directions. And so that entity that it brings into existence is a part whole of itself, must have the same properties of one, because it brings it into existence and it cannot be separate from itself. So, but it has to have, now it becomes the will of one is the free will of the entity. Because now there are many entities, and those entities, to know each other, they must communicate. And to communicate, they need classical physics. They need symbols in some space, which is space and time, symbols that are shareable, because we cannot share what we feel. In quantum physics, the state of the field cannot be reproduced, And what you can know of that state, if you measure, if you attempt to know it from the outside, is only 1 bit per quantum bit. So 1 bit per quantum bit is 0 or 1, two possible values, respect of an infinity of values, which is a quantum bit. So so that's why I say these quantum fields are the best analogy to who we are, because, and there must be conscious, because the property of consciousness are exactly the properties of the quantum fields, except the quantum fields is simply the quantum field is a abstract object that is, however, considered the ontology by physicists. The ontology of the universe is in the quantum fields, but the quantum fields are described then mathematically, but the description of the reality from mathematics is not the experience of the field itself. So the state of the field is the representation of an experience of the field that knows itself. But the qualia
Can I
experience.
respond to that, Simon?
What?
Yeah.
Can I respond? Can I just go back to the beginning, a little bit further back, Federico? What you said, the two statements you made fairly on in this last thing. You said that consciousness wants to know itself and is inherently self-reflective.
Yeah.
I would
The
question
satiety,
that.
the satiety, non-consciousness, the satiety. Consciousness is a property of this. In my view, the satiety is the ontology is in the satiety, and consciousness is a property of the satiety. It's not consciousness is not the name of the whole. The whole.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. So in my paradigm, my view, consciousness is the one. It's not a property of anything. Everything is a property of consciousness, and that consciousness doesn't. So we're using the term. I think that's where possibly we diverge. But I would suggest that consciousness doesn't want to know itself, but because it any more than the sun wants to illuminate itself. Consciousness knows itself. It is consciousness' nature to know itself. It knows itself just by being itself, and nor is consciousness self-reflective, because in order to self-reflect on anything, we must turn around and look back at it. The sun cannot reflect on itself, because to do so, it would have to stand apart from itself and look back on itself. So it's the finite mind that is self-reflective. When consciousness seems to limit itself and seems to become a finite mind, that finite mind can reflect on itself, and it's like the space in your room reflecting on itself. But the infinite consciousness, the only one that truly is, it has no desire to know itself, because it knows itself but just by being itself. And it not only can it not reflect on itself, it need not. It doesn't know itself by reflecting on itself. It knows itself by being itself. Now, why then, we might ask, does consciousness localize itself in the form of a mind? And now I think the next part we possibly do converge, Federico, in that I wouldn't say this was the reason consciousness localizes as the finite mind or brings manifestation into apparent existence. I don't think ultimately there is a reason, but it localizes itself in a finite mind in order to draw its infinite potential, draw its potential out of, to draw out its formless potential in form. Mm-hmm. Because it's only through the perceiving apparatus of a finite mind that form can be known. The subject-object relationship is the mechanism by which form is known. So if there's no subject-object relationship, there's no form, there's no experience. This is why consciousness knows nothing by itself. It just knows its own being. If consciousness wants, in inverted commas, to know something, it has to divide itself, or seem to divide itself into subject-object. And it is only from the point of view of an apparently separate subject of experience that it can know itself as an object. So by seeming to localize itself as a finite mind, it realizes its infinite potential in form. So the purpose of a human of a human being, of any finite being, is not for consciousness to know itself. Consciousness cannot know itself in the form of the human being. It knows itself by itself. But it is through the perceiving apparatus of a human being that it is able to bring into apparent existence its infinite potential. And this is why the English poet William Wordsworth said, we half create, half perceive the world. We perceive the reality of the world because that's all that's there, infinite consciousness, but our perceiving faculties create its appearance. So what we perceive as the world is an interaction between infinite consciousness and its temporary localization as a finite mind. And the interaction of these two creates the appearance of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, first of all, words are pointers to meaning, and they're very, very poor pointers to meaning. So when I say the word self-reflection, I don't mean that there is a mirror that the energy reflects it. I mean, that would be silly, right? I mean, I simply mean that it is a property in which the totality actually has an experience of itself. So where is that experience of itself? That actually experience of itself is what I call mind. And so the mind is the experience. But by the way, and also, who am I to believe that I can know one, right? I mean, come on. So I had to start. I have to start with the idea that we are good who we are, deep down, not at the essence of who we are, is a good representation of one, because we are part whole of one. Exactly like each cell of my body is a part whole of my body. Okay, so there is an holographic principle here at place, which is the part whole, that the part can contain the whole. And there is a fractal aspect of reality, which is the same model is repeated at different scales. Okay, so this is a nature of reality that we also see in the physical reality, which of course is not disconnected from the mental reality, and is not disconnected from the spiritual reality, which is the meaning aspect of reality, which is deeper yet of the mind. The mind is the one that is like a mirror, but is a mirror which is part of the whole that self-reflects. It is the fact that it is how we can talk about it from human beings that don't live in a reality which is completely different than the reality in which one exists. I'm sure of that. So we had to use whatever poor words we have to kind of glean at something. But I know that, how do I know myself? I know myself in the mind, right? I don't. But I also know myself in a direct experience, which doesn't even seem to be in the mind. That's kind of in a lived experience. Imagine when
Yes.
you are a kid, and you lose yourself in the game. You don't even have a self now. You are the game. You become the game. That is the type of direct experience of who we are that is possible within ourselves, and we have it when we're children. We lose it after 5 or 6 year old or 7 years old. Because we tend to think too much. We tend to the mind is and that deeper experience is part of spirit, or what I call spirit, is gets to the meaning of who we are. That love that we feel for each other, that joy, that exuberance, that spontaneity that we can express in that aspect of who we are. So, in a sense, a child is closer to one that we are when we're grown up, and that we become much more, too much of a mind and too much of a rational aspect, and we forget about it. Anyway, hopefully I have given it. So we are, when we are a part whole, means that we are not disconnected from the whole. There is nothing disconnected. And one, in order for one to know itself, it knows through us as well. Not only does it know itself within itself, independent of us, but it also knows itself through its parts, through our own knowledge that becomes his knowledge, but it becomes his knowledge through a transformation that is like when you combine quantum fields into the totality quantum fields is a superposition operation, which in quantum physics creates something which is infinitely more than the sum of the parts. That's the kind of experience of one that I can imagine, but I cannot imagine. I mean, I can only kind of, get a little glimpse, but certainly the experience of one of me and you, it also one can experience the way I am, my direct experience, but also my experience of you that is with my point of view, and your experience that you have of you, of my, with your point of view of me. And so and so is called is called a tensor product in quantum physics. The tensor product is all the possible combination possible of all these states. That's the tensor product, and one knows itself that way. What could that be in terms of an experience? Because one knows by experiencing itself, it is not going to, to write a paper on it.
Can I just ask a question on free will specifically?
Yes.
So the one has free will.
He has will. I mean, yes, free
Okay,
will.
Okay, free will.
But it's only,
But
it would be only his will. I mean, his will is free.
sure, but
But
in your model, though, Federico, the seities, these
yeah,
conscious fields,
yeah.
they have their own free will.
Yes, they have their own free will. They can choose what to observe, for example, what to observe. Just what there is a field of information, a huge field of information available. They decide what to look, for example, what to observe, and transform into meaning, qualia and meaning within themselves. And then they can choose with free will what to express of what they feel, because what they feel is not known. They need to express it. They express it with symbols, symbolically, and so that choice of what symbols to observe and what meaning to transform into symbols to make public, those are free will choices.
So there are many different conscious field seities with different free wills. So there are lots of different free wills. Now that's certainly, as far as I understand, your teachings, Rupert.
Is the minimum that, basically I choose what to, how to observe you and pay attention to what you're telling me, for example, and what I'm going to tell you. I mean, that's free will. I mean, it's not free will that I can do whatever I want. I mean, that would be silly, but there are no names. I mean, so we have to use what we got and then explain it with example. I mean, that's the only other way.
Yeah. Rupert, you would, as far as I'm familiar with your teaching, individual free will is illusory. A decision comes up like a hiccup, as Alan Watts would say.
Simon, I'm afraid it's worse than that. It's not that individual free will is illusory. It's that the individual is illusory. Yeah. Whether or not that individual has free will is like asking, does King Lear have free will? There is no character. There is no person called King Lear. It's John Smith dressed up. So I think consciousness is free, inherently free by definition, because there's nothing in consciousness other than consciousness with which its inherent freedom could be bound or limited. So that the nature of reality is freedom, and all there is to each of our minds is infinite consciousness, just like all there is to the space in the room in which you are sitting is the vast space of the universe. So the vast space of the universe is obviously unbound. It is free. Well, the space in your room is the same unbound, free space that is the vast space of the universe. But If the space in your room identifies itself with the four walls in which it seems to be contained and with the objects that it seems to contain, it gives up or seems to give up its freedom. It allows itself to be bound by its own belief system. But even then, it's not really bound. That the space is always free. So that there is no, ultimately there is no individual entity either to be bound or to have free will. There is just the freedom of the one. And this is reflected in each of our minds as the deep conviction that we all have that we have freedom. Now, why do we all believe we have freedom? Why do we believe we have free will? If we really believed we had free will, what's the very first thing we would do with our free will? Well, what is it that all people want above all else? They want to be happy and they want to love. Well, if you had free will, why don't you just choose to be happy unconditionally, irrespective of what's taking place in your life? So you would use your freedom to be happy, but we don't do that, and yet, so at that level, that there's no freedom, and yet at the same time, in spite of that obvious fact, we all feel profoundly that we are free. We love freedom. Why do we love freedom? Because we have this intuition that each of us has, that at the deepest level, what we truly are is free. So that accounts for this seeming contradiction, that we're not free to choose our thoughts and feelings. Otherwise, obviously, everyone would obviously choose to be happy all the time. But at the same time, we know we're not mechanical machines. If somebody says to us, you're just a programmed machine, the sum total of all your conditioning, we rebel against it, because we know that there is something possible in our experience that is not just a mechanical continuation of the past. That it is possible for there to be a vertical intervention of the infinite in the of being in the horizontal line of time, the conditioned line of time, and we all know this, and we all experience this. This is why there is creativity. It would not be possible for there to be creativity if there was not freedom.
Most of us, I think, are of the view that we need to be loved to be happy. That seems to be my.
Why wouldn't you just choose? Okay, you understand. Not everyone is going to love me. Am I going to be miserable because some people don't love me? No, I just choose to be happy whether people love me or not. I choose to be happy if people hate me. Wouldn't you be happy? Wouldn't you love to be happy when people criticize you and put you down?
Absolutely. I think as you get older and you mature, but I think there is this desire to be loved. And I wonder, Federico, how this relates to that intuition that you had during your experience of that it's not to be loved, it's that we are love.
Yeah, I mean my idea of what love is, before that experience was a childish idea of love, mostly closer to what you were saying, that we need to be loved, probably because I didn't have love enough from my parents, and so I was seeking love outside of me, and so finding out that I am the source of love, and that love is not even directed to anybody, it's just love, and I am love. And not only that, but it's conscious love. It's my love that is conscious. I mean, all of a sudden, that is telling that the idea that I had about reality was basically childish. And so it changed completely my sense of who I am. And but to me, free will, unfortunately, free will has such a the word free will implies so many things which I don't mean when I use the word free will. It's again the problem with words that we have, unless we change the words. But there is freedom, which is that is what Rupert is talking about. But that freedom is not that we are guided by that we do the will of somebody else. We do what somebody else wants us to do. That's not this is the point is that we are independent, and we can choose to conduct our self-knowing in the way we think is the best way to self-know. So in that sense, we are free to choose that kind of self-knowing. Also, free will would never be a property of the body in my case, because free will is a property of the field that is conscious, which is not. The body is neither conscious nor has free will in my model. So, I'm not saying that when I say we have free will, I'm talking about my body. The body does not have free will, nor is it conscious. Conscious is a
So
property of the field that doesn't even exist in space and time. So it's a much more structured kind of model. The one that I have is not, you don't flat line, you just reduce everything to the consciousness of one. Of course, there is a consciousness of one, but there are also parts whole of one which are interacting. And through that knowing of these parts, one knows itself, but one knows itself not only through its parts, also knows itself from within itself, the totality of what it is, and on it goes. So and also I'm, in this way, I'm not moving away from what physics knows. I'm actually using physics as a model, to explain the metaphysics that otherwise is unexplainable. And finding that if you start with metaphysics, meaning if you start by saying consciousness and free will exist, then you can explain why the quantum fields do what they do and they have the properties that they do. Because the state of the quantum fields is the representation, the state of the quantum field is the representation of a conscious experience. Because it has the same properties. The state is private, only knowable by the field itself, and you can only know a small part of what your experience is, which is also the same for us. The love that I feel for a person, if I say I love you, am I expressing what I feel? No, I'm expressing a tiny part of what I feel. So and the moment that you say the field is conscious, then you can interpret the collapse of the wave function as the free will of that field to decide what symbols to manifest. So now we can interpret exactly what physicists for 100 years have been unable to interpret, because physicists do not understand why there is entanglement in superposition of states, and in quantum information is non-clonable, non-reproducible, and why Holivos theorem says that you can only know a bit per quantum bit. Those are all crazy things, the unexplainable. They are completely explainable in this case because they represent the self-knowing of the field, and the self-knowing, the conscious experience of the field, and the collapse of the wave function, which is the basic problem of the measurement problem in quantum physics, is now explainable because the field is conscious. Then what is seen only as randomness from the physicist is actually a decision of free will. From the outside is random. For the inside, the field knows what it wants. It has decided to show that electron or that proton or that action of a human body. You see, so that's how. Yeah.
So, according to your model, you say classic, and correct me if I'm wrong, classic physics is external, quote unquote, reality, and quantum physics is internal, private reality.
Yes, quantum physics represents the mind of the universe. The classical physics represents the stuff that you can, the stuff in space and time that you can measure, that can be expressed in classical physics, because any measurement that you make is about a classical thing. You cannot measure an electron. The electron interacts in ways that we don't understand with an instrument, and what you measure is a light that turns on or a dial that moves. Whatever happens, that is classical information. It's already macroscopic. It's not, nobody has ever seen a particle. In fact, particles cannot be seen. They act with other particles in ways that then can get amplified somehow, and they appear as shareable information, classical information. So the physics, the physics represent this stuff with the symbolic aspects that we use, the symbols that we use to communicate with each other. The mental aspect is represented by quantum physics, but then there is the spiritual aspect. That's the meaning of the experience, the meaning of the experience, which is representable by qualia, which is the state of the field. So the state of the field becomes qualia. The qualias are the bringer or the carrier of meaning. The meaning is what we actually, the essence of our self-knowing. And the self-knowing of one is the meaning of ourselves. Who are we? Is answering why instead of how.
Can I just move things on a little bit? I just want to move things on in terms of this critical juncture we find ourselves in, and also touching on AI, because obviously, the technology of AI has moved things forward dramatically, and there is this fear that it could be cataclysmic for humanity. And there's also a lot of people saying, could AI be conscious, or even is AI already conscious? And I have no doubt you both agree that that's obviously absurd.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Rupert?
Yes, I agree. It's absurd. It's the most ridiculous idea. It's based on such a simplistic misunderstanding. But this is where I think the misunderstanding comes from. We believe that it is we as a person, as a body mind, who are conscious or have consciousness, and indeed this, and therefore we simply extrapolate that fact. Well, if I, as this body, am conscious or have consciousness, then it's obvious that a dog is conscious or has consciousness, because if I tread on my dog's tail, it barks. It obviously feels, it's conscious of the pain, and therefore, if a dog is conscious, therefore a bat must be conscious, and if a bat's conscious, a snake, and so on. And therefore, it's only a matter of time before this conglomeration of particles that is the body we'll be able to build a computer that's configured in a way that will, just like a human body is conscious, the computer will be conscious. It's all based on a fundamental misunderstanding that now I, the body, am conscious or have consciousness. And this was enshrined by Thomas Nagel in the 70s by his statement, which has dominated philosophy of mind debates ever since, and which I consider to be a mistake. And namely, he said, I'm not quoting him probably accurately, he said something like this: an entity can only be considered to be conscious or to have conscious states if and only if there is something it is like to be that entity. Now, why does he think that a bat is conscious only if there is something it is like to be a bat? Because he erroneously believes that he has the experience of being a human being. Nobody has the experience of being a human being. Human experience is what we know. Consciousness is what we are. So there is nothing it is like to be a computer, nor will there ever be. There's nothing it's like to be a bat. There's nothing it's like to be a human being. There is only something it is like to be being. There's only something it's like to be consciousness, because only consciousness is conscious, and therefore only consciousness can have the experience of being itself. So the suggestion that a body can have the experience of being itself is just a childish mistake. And then we extrapolate that and think, well, okay, if something has the experience of being itself, like a body, or let's say a bat has the experience of being a bat, then it must be conscious. But it's a human being doesn't have the experience of being itself. Only consciousness is conscious, and therefore only consciousness has the experience of being itself. So no, human beings aren't conscious, bats aren't conscious, and computers will never be conscious. Only consciousness is conscious, and nothing else will ever be conscious, because there is nothing else apart from consciousness to be itself.
Federico, would you say there is one that is conscious, and then within that, or from that, there are these conscious field deities that basically
I think,
operate humans and bats and everything like drones?
yeah, I mean, the bodies are drones, so that just like the drones in Afghanistan that we we send there are not conscious. We are conscious of what they see, but the conscious is not even in our body; is in the consciousness, which is a field. the consciousness that uses the body to pilot a drone, but gives the commands to the body to pilot the drone to do its bidding in Afghanistan. And the body, which is quantum and classical, is not conscious. Never mind a computer, which is even less. The computer is just classical system, made of parts that behave deterministically, where the quantum parts are not deterministic. So a big difference. They are, very clear to me that a computer will never be conscious, and the surprising thing is how well they can simulate, not simulate, they can imitate our knowing, our verbal knowing, for example, with the new large language models. It shows how close, the correlations between symbols and meaning that we have in what we do in this world is close enough, good enough that you can actually imitate to the point that you cannot distinguish if what you read was actually produced by a conscious individual, the brain of a conscious individual, which is not the body, and the machine. So that to me that has been a surprise. And by the way, has been a surprise also to the workers, to the people that developed this software in the last few years, which is a surprising because it is better than an average person. And it's getting better. But it doesn't mean that the computer is conscious at all. It simply means that the computer can imitate us so much better, our conscious behavior so much better. And here, just to be like, even more important, just to be like us doesn't mean that it is like us.
Yeah.
I don't know how better to say it. Basically, the imitation of reality cannot be reality. A theory of reality is not reality, right? A theory. The simulation of the theory of reality is even less of a reality than reality because a simulation is actually done not with the full precision that is possible in a theory of reality, which uses numbers which could be infinite with infinite precision. So you could have closed form solutions of a problem, for example, that are not possible with a computer. Artificial intelligence is essentially a simulation of a theory of reality based, however, on data that we have produced. And so it only reflects, is an image, a reflection of our own knowledge. And it is a reflection that, on the other hand, is surprisingly good. And what it means that in order to use it well, since it makes mistakes, it doesn't understand, it cannot understand. Understanding, comprehension is based on the meaning, not on the symbols. There is a problem in physics and in science that information has nothing to do with meaning. Information in science is only about the probability of a symbol or of an event happening. That's it. No meaning. And therefore, go ahead.
A big question, Federico and Rupert, for how we use AI. And
of course,
so we spoke about the ego earlier, this egoic identification with the body, the belief that we are the body, and then we share, as you say, Rupert, the destiny and limitations of the body, which then obviously brings up a certain amount of fear because death is coming, and also desire because we want to enjoy ourselves as while we're here, so to speak. And so that the egoic belief that we are the body seems to be as well contributing, for example, to the way AI is used, as some people are desperately trying to find ways that they will be able to upload their consciousness to a computer to come back in 100, 200 years' time. And actually, some of the people who are most well known following this this desire to do that are the same people that are actually driving some of the movements that we are seeing across the world right now. So the egoic way we use AI could be hugely destructive. But Federico, you would say if we use it, and I'm sure you would too, Rupert, in the pursuit of truth and love, then it would completely transform and actually could be a real, a powerful addition to awakening and self-realization.
Yeah, I agree, but the problem is that most of us are, believing scientism. So they believe we are the body. They also believe that the purpose of life is the survival of the fittest. What does that belief mean? It means that the essence of reality is selfishness, because survival, I'm fitter than you, so I shoot you first. I mean, this kind of mindset is actually enshrined into the fundamental principle of evolution. Is the survival of the fittest. How worse than that can you be? So if you are if you are informed by this type of worldview, are you going to use ethically AI? Of course not. You're going to use it to gain, to be more effective in cheating and lying. And so, and if you use it properly, okay, you must know more than AI. So in fact, I see the following situation in the world in the next decade or so. That basically AI will make the 5% of the people in the world much more effective, because they will use it properly. They will know when AI is making a mistake. They will use it by cross-referencing, and they figure out more. They understand. They can drive their mental processes much more rapidly and much more effectively by using AI. And the rest of the population will use it to basically get away with it, simply without critical judgment. They will simply say what the AI says, and then they will become dumber and dumber instead of becoming smarter and smarter. Where if we use them properly, then we will all rise to the to a new level of understanding. But to do that, we need to embrace our heart. And the AI is there is nothing of heart in the AI. There is, and we need to embrace courage, the ethical courage, which distinguishes us from any kind of action. And so, this is the problem that we have today, and that's why I'm really, urging, with trying to explain how consciousness cannot be a property of the physical body, and we have to go beyond. But in order to do that, I think that we have to create ways in which people can experience themselves as not the body, like I did. Otherwise, intellectually, you cannot get there from here. You need, we need to, the people that are ready, need to have some ways in which, and I'm not talking about drugs, because I don't believe that drugs are the right means to. At the most, they will, if you use it once, they can give you a sense that reality is not what you thought, maybe different than what you thought, but that's it. But it's only the coherence of a conscious being that can actually drive, an experience that is also coherent in order to go the next level that we need to be.
Well, Rupert, you said it earlier, the paradigm has to shift. And so, to Federico's point there, how can the paradigm shift and therefore everything else follow on?
I think the paradigm shifts when a sufficient number of people recognize who they essentially are, recognizes that consciousness is primary, is fundamental. And particularly those people who are in influential positions like Federico. And at some point, hopefully, there is a kind of tipping, as a sufficient number of people. It is obvious for a sufficient number of people that the old paradigm is it's completely dysfunctional. It's completely it's not related to reality, and it is the cause of look at our world. Look what's taking place in the world. Our erroneous paradigm is directly responsible for this, the despair, the conflict, the hatred, and so on. And it has to, but it has to start with individuals, and a sufficient number of people for whom it becomes increasingly obvious. We've just got it back to front and upside down. We've just been duped by the erroneous evidence of sense perception. We just made this simplistic mistake early on, and we didn't even realize we don't even realize that. Most people don't even realize that their view of reality is just conditioned by their culture. It's like someone who's been wearing contact lenses, orange tinted contact lenses for so long that they don't realize they're wearing contact lenses. They just think they're looking through their clear eyes. Actually, they're looking through their orange tinted contact lenses, and it gives you a completely distorted view of reality, but they don't realize it. They think, I'm just looking through my eyes. I'm seeing reality as it is. Well, the materialist paradigm that we live in is just like wearing a filter on the mind, whose premise is the premise of separation and materialism and reductionism. It's a simplistic mistake, and more and more people are realizing this. Not just of course, I'm not in the world that Federico's in. I've been brought up in the spiritual traditions, and those are the people you know that I'm speaking to. But it's not just people nowadays in those traditions, and that's very good. It's people from outside the spiritual traditions, people like Federico, Bernardo, Donald. These people who have not arrived at this understanding through the traditional paths of spiritual investigation, as I have, and I think that's why it's so it's immensely important that Federico, Bernardo, Donald are speaking about this in an area that is not, unlike the people I speak to, who are well predisposed to. They've already had an intuition of this. They're already 3/4 of the way there. There's just, my job's so easy. But your job, Federico and Bernardo, Donald, you're interacting with people whose worldview is much more hardened, and of course these are hugely intelligent people whose intelligence has been appropriated by the ego and used in its service. And for all their intelligence, they are blind to a simple mistake. They're wearing orange tinted contact lenses and they don't realize it.
I would say dark blue, Rupert.
Dark blue. Well, I didn't want to be too radical, Federico. I wanted to be to kind of moderate and not too outspoken.
Yeah.
You're right. Dark blue and not only that, they're
Close to the
dark blue,
blind,
they're
leading the
frosted,
blind.
and they're cracked. So although you're looking at one reality, you actually see it fragmented. There's no fragments out there. There are no things out there.
Yeah.
But because your contact lenses are all cracked, you think you're seeing many different things. Thank you for giving me permission, Federico, from being a little bit more radical and honest.
Well, I mean, there's obviously a few differences in the way you view things, but the fundamentals are the same in that there is the one, and we are in different ways perhaps expressions of that, and therefore recognizing our shared being and acting in accordance with that is the fundamental principle, which brings me to that quote you always say, Rupert, which is, it's not yours, but you nod to it, love and do as you will, right? And that's the key thing. That's it, really.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. Love, because if you stand in love, you stand as the one. You see only the one.
yeah,
Everything you do is consistent with that. You can't go wrong.
yeah,
And just I wanted just to say, Simon, going back, I've been very, very interested in this conversation and the conversations that I've been listening to of you, Federico, to see what is just semantic difference and where do we really disagree. And that there are a few little things we have slightly different points, but they're insignificant.
Yeah,
They're just due to our different models, and they're totally insignificant. We're saying they're singing our own song in our own way according to our backgrounds, and I feel totally in one with you. I love what you're saying, and I feel completely in resonant with it.
yeah. Likewise, I mean, the details are not that important, and the essence is that we are parts whole of one. We are, in a sense, we live within one. We are one, and yet we have, for many. We wear many. Wear many bodies.
Exactly. Yes.
We have many experiences, and we know ourselves in many ways, and so one knows itself in many ways. But fine, so what? I mean, the point is that the by being part whole, the only game in town is cooperation, working together, loving each other, working for
Exactly.
the good of everybody. And just the opposite of what the scientism saying is this: be the most, the be the most fit. What is the how do you define fitness? The one that survives, of course. All right. So now the principle of life is the survivor or the one that survives. I mean, come on. I mean, this is complete BS. Complete, circularity, tautology. I mean, and it means nothing. It's deceiving everybody. And that's what when you study evolution and everything else, this is the principle of life. When the principle of life is one that by knowing itself creates new entities, it gives life, it gives existence to new entities. That is is one reproducing itself into parts whole, just like an egg reproducing itself into the cells that form an organism which reflects one.
yeah. Well, I mean, it's been a pleasure talking to you both. And fundamentally, it's the one expressing itself and
Yeah.
through the three of us. And I think recognizing that is a beautiful thing. And
Yeah.
that's, as you say, the only really thing that matters. And everything seems to fall in line from that. So, listen, thank you very much, Federico. Rupert, always a pleasure.
Thank
Just
you,
lovely
Rupert.
to speak to you both
Thank you,
and hear you
Simon.
both.
Thank you, Federico. Lovely to meet you properly. Thank you, Simon.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you. It was
Thank you.
was wonderful. I
Beautiful
enjoyed it.
conversation.
Yes,
Thank you both.
thanks.